Welcome, everyone. My name is Patrice Funderburg. I am the Executive Director at the Center for Community Transitions, where we work with people and families that are impacted by criminal justice involvement. I am super excited to welcome you to our very first episode of the Own Your Journey podcast. This is in celebration of CCT's 50th anniversary year, and I'm looking forward to chopping it up and having a great conversation with my friend and colleague, Derrik Anderson, who is the Executive Director of Race Matters for Juvenile Justice. We'll get into it a little bit more about what that all means in a moment. The purpose of the Own Your Journey podcast is to own our collective journey toward making Charlotte a second chance city through community, conversations, and collaborations. This is how we make Charlotte a second chance city, and I and everyone at the Center for Community Transitions is committed to doing that work. So let's get started.
Okay.
All right. So Derrik Anderson, you are the Executive Director at Race Matters for Juvenile Justice. Tell us a little bit about your journey and what does Race Matters for Juvenile Justice do?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to join you on this platform. I appreciate you thinking of us, especially at a historic moment in the journey of the organization, your organization. Again, Derrik Anderson. I am currently the inaugural Executive Director for Race Matters for Juvenile Justice, yes. And so I don't take that lightly, just the amount of work that our pioneers and leaders did in order to begin to move and stand this organization up. And so I, like yourself and others, we stand on the shoulder of giants in our community. So I think it would not fail that we have to acknowledge a lot of our ancestors who have come before us to be trailblazers in the work that we're doing. And I just think this is our opportunity to carry the baton to run our next leg. That's and right. So I appreciate being on this journey and running this leg with you.
I like that, trailblazers.
Yeah. And I think each of us have a social and moral obligation to do our part to make our systems and community better, particularly those who are justice involved. And I think for the work of RMJJ, my journey with them started, my background and experience is social worker, nonprofit management. And I spent a little bit of time on faculty at a local university. And so when you think about the work of social workers, clinicians, helping people, but also in academia and also in nonprofit. And then that part of my journey, and I got connected because of some of the work that I was doing with a social service organization to RMJJ. I became a part of their leadership team. And then eventually advanced to become, the executive director for the organization. It's been a wonderful journey. But I also like to say I'm still on my journey. Even though I've been in the space of racial equity for a little over, maybe 13 years, we're always learning. We're always growing. There's so much that we can do as it relates to our information gap, as it relates to our blind spots, as it relates to our knowledge and awareness, particularly around the inequities that take place within systems and institutions. And so one of the great things I enjoy about this work is that what I understand about my journey is that early on, we sometimes don't know what we don't know.
Right.
We also are not aware of times, even in our professional fields, been educated by different types of institutions, no matter our credentials, we still have biases. And our biases show up. And so when we think about, I would say, I statement, my implicit or explicit bias, one of the things I really focus on is how much harm have I done, even as a person of color, intention, unintentional, to other marginalized and oppressed groups.
Yes.
And then how do I own my own stuff? When you talk about owning this journey, right? That's a part of the process. The other piece I think about the harm that's called intentionally and unintentionally by our thinking, by our choices, by our decisions, our actions, and our behaviors. And I think this is a part of that journey. And I think we have to acknowledge it in a way of practicing the power of self-reflection.
Yes.
To really reflect on my decision-making, my thinking, my acting, my behavior, my choices, and what does that look like when it comes to me being responsible and accountable to decisions that I made that may impact the lives of other people.
You're dropping some jewels here.
But that's my work. One of the things that I share is that I am the work, you are the work, we are the work. And each one of us has to do our part. and moving forward, not just individually in terms of how we shifting our thinking and shifting our mental model, but also how we working in proper concert and relationship with other people.
Yes.
The work that you and I in is relationship work and trust work.
Exactly.
And so, but people have to trust you. But if you can't acknowledge the harm that you're doing or have done, then how can we be in right relationship trying to move toward a shared goal if we haven't established what those shared values are?
Exactly. That makes me think about language like second chances, right?
Yes.
So when folks ask me, how did I get into nonprofit? I often reflect on that because my journey didn't start in the nonprofit sector, right? I spent 2.5 decades working in corporate HR. And now I work with and alongside folks that have the lived experience of incarceration or justice involvement. Formerly incarcerated folks is some of the language that we sometimes use. And so now I think about, I work with the formerly incarcerated, and I'm a formerly indoctrinated corporate HR person, right? And like, what are the chances, right? And the things that I had to unlearn, right? Working in corporate HR, working in diversity and inclusion spaces, advocating for marginalized communities in the corporate sector, and now bridging that work in the nonprofit sector to folks who are often profiled and identified as felons and violent folks. And there's a narrative that is out here in the universe where all people who have had criminal justice involvement are not violent folks. Correct. It doesn't always equate to, if you have a criminal background, there's a public safety risk.
Correct.
Right? And so inside of that, I think about the work that I was introduced to, back in 2016, I did the 2-day, now called racial equity class with RMJJ. Back then it was called Dismantling Racism.
Correct.
And the strong connections to a framework of unlearning, right? And so there's a lot that I and others who engage in this work have to unlearn along our journey. Yes. And RMJJ has been a big part of that. Some of the conversations that you and I have had recently about cross-system collaboration really helps folks anchor to that journey, right? Starting in the what didn't I realize that I didn't know? And as a result of that not knowing, I may have been creating harm. I went through that journey. It sounds like you went through that journey. And now together, our conversations have really been about how can we have that journey together as a part of not even just CCT's 50th anniversary, but making Charlotte a second chance city, right? That steps into the realm of belonging.
Yes.
What is RMJJ doing around in that space?
No, thank you. Well, I appreciate what you just said, because I think two pieces. One, when you think about the mission and vision of RMJJ, where we're really focused on building, bringing together community stakeholders to really look at how we can partner in the court's effort to reduce disparity and disproportionality, but also around a greater vision in terms of the composition and outcomes within the juvenile courts, but also adult courts and in systems, more importantly, that can't be predicted by race and ethnicity. And so as we think about our journey at RMJJ, we want to make sure that we are staying focused on our mission and vision, which is important, which is to reduce disparity, disproportionality, youth of color in our juvenile justice system. At the same time, we want to also draw a distinction that is also not just juvenile justice systems, but it's all the other systems as well. And so as a part of our work, when you think about our 2-day racial equity workshop, that really level sets and gain alignment around language, terms, and definitions, specifically when you're talking about race or racism, institutional racism, structural racism, white supremacy, implicit bias, it helps people to bring a broader perspective to understanding what that is, but more importantly, helping people to really begin to understand the root cause about the inequities that we see in systems and institutions, where you see whites have the best outcomes and blacks and people of color have the worst outcomes across all systems. And so helping people to kind of connect those dots, that 2-day racial equity experience does that in a sense. Even though each one of us are on our journey and understand that's kind of the starting place for us in our work. That means that any volunteer, anybody that serves on our board committees, is a requirement that they participate into that experience. But one of the great things I would like to say about Race Matters Juvenile Justice is that we have educated approximately a little around 6,700 people within the Charlotte-Mecklenburg community in that two-day racial equity workshop, and we've hosted a little more than 250 workshops over the past 13 years.
Wow.
And so
That's some numbers.
It is.
That's
it is.
Some numbers.
And one of the things that I share with the teams that I appreciate the numbers, but how we measure our impact. Mm-hmm. How do we measure our impact within systems and institutions? What does the data say, right? Yes. And so we are young as an organization, as a newly formed 501c nonprofit organization in the community that really began to think about we're not in this alone. Mm-hmm. And how do we begin to look at and bring it together other people who have a shared interest or shared value or self-interest want to do this work. And so the composition of our workshops really focus on multidisciplines, not just in criminal justice. You think about law enforcement, education. You also think about healthcare, public health, social service, nonprofit, faith community. There's a variety of different representation from different industries and communities within our workshops. And so what that transitions to is that, one, we have a pillar that really focuses on our youth and our youth initiative that really center the voice and story and lived experiences of our youth to co-create and share power with them, to begin to look at how to use their voice to really influence change within policies, procedures, and practices. And that's what we focus on really as an organization, really looking at practice change. The second piece, to get to your question, around the sense of belonging. And so when you think about the diverse representation in our workshops, now we're really standing up this pillar, really around cross-systems collaboration to really look at collective impact. And as a part of that process, we building a framework out, looking at, one, intersectionality, bringing in people from diverse social identities that really become a part of this process and feel like they have agency. The second piece we want to make sure is that we are creating the opportunity where people have a sense of belonging from a standpoint where they feel like they've been seen, they've been heard, they've been valued, they've been respected. Yeah. And then they can share their true, authentic voice without judgment. Yeah. So cultivating a culture around that where people can come no matter where you are in your journey and feel like that you have a voice and place in that and respect the voice and space of everyone else. The second piece we began to look at as a part of that is not only the sense of belonging, but also I think it's important that we cultivate in places and spaces where people have a measure of psychological safety. When you're talking about different conversations, difficult subjects, where they feel empowered to use their voice in a way to elevate the conversation, but at the same time be willing to listen to other viewpoints. Yes. And so we've been, I like to say, successful over the last many years as we cultivate our bi-monthly community conversations, what we call our Catalyzing Change, where we are very intentional in bringing alumni to get back together to begin to talk about these things around race, around racial equity, or all the other topics that center that we were able to do, and then cultivate it in a way where we all are listening, we're learning, but we also build in our racial equity muscles.
Woo! That was a lot, y'all. That was a lot. If you didn't find a way to get involved in making Charlotte a second chance city, I'm going to need you to run that back and rewatch or listen to what Derrik just said, because there is no stone unturned in the work that RMJJ is doing around making Charlotte a more equitable and inclusive city. And imagine what we can do together, what we will do together when we really start to activate second chances in the work that we are doing as a part of our 50th anniversary celebration, but more importantly, as the future and for the future of our city. So much I want to dig into that you just said. Man, belonging, own your journey to belonging and making Charlotte a second chance city. So oftentimes in our work, so at the Center for Community Transitions, we have 3 programs. Our flagship program has been our LifeWorks program, which is actually right here where we are at the Goodwill Opportunity Campus. Our LifeWorks program sits right here where we offer supportive employment for anyone who has justice involvement, whether it's recently released or you have a criminal conviction history and never spent time in jail or prison, or you did spend time in jail and prison, and that collateral consequence is what we use, the language that we use in this space around barriers to employment. So we have a team here that offers that workshop on a regular rotating basis, and then we also partner with local employers on ways to begin to ask the appropriate questions and do assessment internally about, are we an organization or business ready to hold space for second chance employment, both from a process standpoint, from an HR business process, but more importantly, from a culture standpoint, right? Like, are we ready to do this work? Then we also have a family program where we work with, I like to say, the littles, students that are in CMS schools that have justice involvement in the home, including deportation. And so we work with social and emotional wellness. We work with students around behavioral health and their caregivers to provide that needed support, because when someone experiences incarceration in the home, the whole family experiences that incarceration. And then our third program is a residential work release program for women who are currently incarcerated. So we work with the North Carolina Department of Adult Corrections, so the state prison system, to provide an opportunity for women who are preparing to be released from state incarceration to come live with us for a couple years, right? I like to say folks have an opportunity to practice their transition with all the wraparound supports right at home. We don't call the center home for the women because we know that we are preparing to provide them with that opportunity for a good transition experience. And I'm super proud of the successes that we've seen in spite of the recent pandemic for the ladies that have graduated from the Center for Women. In fact, during the pandemic, we launched a formal behavioral health department, now led by a licensed clinical social worker.
Wow. Okay.
We've got a licensed clinical addiction specialist on staff and peer support on staff to provide that additional support to the ladies at the house. Super proud of that work at CCT. But what tends to happen in Charlotte is we're doing all this great work over here at CCT. RMJJ is doing all this great work over here and across the community. And we see each other at events, right? But at a systems level, this is what I love about RMJJ. At a systems level, imagine what we can do together when we really start to put our stuff together, right? This is what it means to make Charlotte a more equitable city and towards making Charlotte a second chance city. Oftentimes, folks get confused about the complexity of re-entry work or criminal justice reform. Oftentimes is the language that used. There is law enforcement, right? There is navigating the judicial system, right? There is the trauma of incarceration, and there is re-entry, community supervision. There are different components of the work. And so sometimes when I meet folks and they want to understand kind of the work that we do and how is it involved with what we're seeing on the news around law enforcement and police brutality and some of these other things, and then it becomes this, it's too complex, it's too big, you know, my little involvement is not going to make a difference. And I say, no, that's wrong, right? What might it look like if a person who's a part of catalyzing change, who started off taking the 2-day racial equity class and unlearned some things, right? That too is a part of owning your journey, acknowledging and unlearning some things. And then you choose, here's where I want to get involved. And you mentioned all these areas, particularly centering on youth justice. So raise the age. Let's get into it.
Okay.
There's some things happening around raise the age. So raise the age, North Carolina was the last state to raise the age. What was that, 2018, 2019, I think it was.
Last few states to do so, correct.
It was like, 2017, 2018. And now there's some legislation or some policy changes that are moving through the State House that might reverse some of the legislation that was passed that was affirmative to youth initiatives. With the students that RMJJ is working with and the future of these cross-system collaborations centering on youth justice initiatives, what are some of the things that the students are saying or the young people are saying in terms of what they're navigating around the justice system?
No, that's a great question. Through our youth initiative and where we have partnered with a community organization where we host sessions to really center to voice their story, their lived experience, but also to hear from them. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the pieces that comes up is that when you think about here and now, what's important for them and their self-interest may be somewhat different than what we think their interest is, mm-hmm. right? And so when you think about the challenges, everyday challenges that people are having, and not just what you encounter in school or in community, engaging with systems, but it's also meeting your basic needs. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about food, you're talking about clothing, you're talking about shelter. So when you talk about living wages, and you talk about money. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I think that our workshop is so important, to begin to help us to understand, one, the history around laws and policies that are causing inequities. Mm-hmm. But then two, we have to be very mindful not to blame particularly families, communities of color for positions that they're in without acknowledging the history of the laws and policies in said communities that have created a condition where they provided a structural advantage for some, but at the same time provided a structural advantage for others. And that some structural advantage when we talk about the dominant group, and then the structural disadvantage when we talk about Black, Indigenous, people of color. Right. And so if we're not having the conversation around how resources have been arranged, mm-hmm. how communities have been formed, and what systems, what laws, what policies that set forth this trajectory, then we can get caught up in a symptom of understanding why people may say that when we look at the either the high school dropout rate or the graduation rate, or we look at those who are suspended or in school, out school suspension, or we look at youth who are incarcerated, right, or youth who are detained, or youth who are in our juvenile justice system, or if we look at the health disparities that we're seeing, or if we look at the disparities when it comes to income gaps or wealth and income. So I think when we look across all those systems, we have to begin to recognize what is the root of that. Yeah. And I think until we have a shared language, shared awareness, shared understanding around that, we will continue to throw money and resources at a problem that we won't be able to solve. Yeah,
it's an intersectional lens, right? Yes. We all have to have an intersectional lens, and how we enter the space is largely framed through our frame of reference, right? Through our experiences. And so when we talk about being proximate to the work, right? Youth are proximate to their experiences of being a youth navigating all these intersectional systems, barriers or privileges. Correct. Right. And somewhere along the line, when we become adults, we forget that like youth are people too. Yes. And so I love that RMJJ is focused on really centering the agency of young people to help inform based on their expertise. Correct. Right. Similarly, in the second chance space in adult corrections, centering the lived expertise of the folks who have lived that experience of justice involvement is necessary to put at the center of the work in order to really understand the impact of the systems and structures and policies and practices that have a historical lens that led to some of the disparate outcomes for people of color and Black males in particular, or Black girls when you talk about it from a youth perspective. So what is emerging for me as we're talking, Derrik, is, we keep talking about, you and I have had several conversations about cross-system collaboration at a systems level, right? There are transactions that will naturally result from the system collaboration, but we can't start with the transaction. We got to start with the collaborations at the structural level. Correct. Right? Yeah, that's owning the institutional journey together. Correct. Right? And before we can get to owning the institutional journey together, we have to own our own journeys together. Correct. Right? Because my frame of reference is going to be different from yours based on my relationship with second chances, based on my relationship with incarceration or justice involvement. So based on your experience, and particularly with the Catalyzing Change members, what are some of the conversations that you have with Catalyzing Change folks who are finding their space as they are moving along their journey?
That's a great question. One of the things that I recognize is that And it depends on a person where they are in their journey and their knowledge and awareness around the structural elements that we're seeing around race and racism and institutional racism, structural racism, because I think sometimes based on how we've been socialized or educated, we had a different viewpoint of that language terms of definitions.
Yeah.
And so people are still sitting with that. The second piece is some people are sitting with, how can I be said age and just hearing or learning about this? Or I've been fed this narrative so long that these things that are not have been true.
Right.
And so they are unpacking those experiences.
Yeah.
And we begin to think about what's in your ground, what's in your ground in terms of your family around maybe the land or the home or the resources. And so when you begin to dig in that, it can be challenging for some. And so we talk about people have to own their own truth while respecting the truth of others, even if it's different from yours. And at the same time, we begin to understand that there's one, the lack of knowledge and awareness, and two, the lack of the tools, skills, the capacity to know what to do, but then how to do it.
Right.
And so
It's always the how.
It's always the how, right? But what I've learned that there's harm that can come in that, because there are some that say, tell me what to do, or give me a toolkit, or let me do the checklist, which is transactional. And there's a harm that comes with that, because I like to say, if we haven't done our own due diligence and our own work around the knowledge and awareness, then implementing that tool, we can still cause more harm, intentional, unintentional, right? And so I think we have to be really careful, particularly when we're talking about as a system, as a structure, as a process, as policies and practice. And so there may be some out there who may have good intentions.
Yeah.
But those good intentions can still cause harm.
Right. It sort of inadvertently makes belonging become a transaction.
It could be.
Right.
It could be. But I think there's this notion, I like to say, I really use a systems thinking approach through an equity lens.
Okay. Systems thinking approach through an equity lens.
Lens, right? So when I'm thinking about building out this framework and model around cross-system collaboration, it's going to really be done through a systems thinking approach through an equity lens. The second piece is understanding the difference between transactional and transformational approaches.
Say that again.
Transactional versus transformational approaches.
One more time for the people in the back.
Transactional versus transformational approaches.
Okay.
Because then we can begin to calibrate what bucket that falls on. Is this transactional that you're doing, or is transformational?
Right.
And they may say, well, Derrik, what's the difference? One distinction, transformational begin to shift values, begin to shift policy, procedure, and practice, begin to shift access to resource, begin to shift power, right? So as we're thinking about that, helping people to understand which framework they're operating. And then it could be a both end, right? A middle end. So as a part of that journey. So that's why I think it's important that, for one, we have to understand each other's self-interest. And we have to begin to organize around self-interest, because if you organize around self-interest, you can organize power.
Right.
And so we organize power, we can begin to organize influence and resources. And so I think it's a approach to bring people together, but I think a part of that process, it has to be that around shared values. What are our shared values in this work? And how do we begin to coalesce and build common ground around those shared values while we building relationships, while we building trust? And I think we can begin to move the work along.
Yeah, shared values. Folks define second chances differently, right? Second chances is oftentimes you hear the language of folks who have justice involvement are not the sum total of the mistakes that they made. We also hear all of us are one bad decision away from justice involvement. And then you start to hear all the data that, you know, in right relationship with the direction we want to go is now becoming mainstream conversation about the number of folks who are currently incarcerated, a little over 2 million, and the 70 plus million folks who have criminal conviction histories that oftentimes are the untapped talent pool. And if I'm a business person, or if I'm an employer or an HR person, and I am trying to source talent, and I hear this number of this 70 million people, how do I get access to this 70 million people? But if I haven't done my work individually, then I can't do my work as a part of an institution to really bring second chance employment right to the fore within an organization, because my individual personal biases that I haven't reckoned with, right, don't allow me to advocate for policies, practices, programs from an HR standpoint that create a pathway for someone who has justice involvement to gain living wage employment, to sort of change that trajectory. what I'm hearing you say, Derrik, is RMJJ is offering to our community, come hang with us, right? And in a structured and formal way that invites you to reckon, to acknowledge, to get some tools and resources, and also community to do your individual work and take that back to your institution, whatever your institution might be. Correct. The workplace, the faith place, the neighborhood, the community space. And now you have an opportunity to be the change, right? Not to sound cliche, but to literally be the change. And that's so desperately needed in our community in Charlotte. Coming out of HR and coming into the nonprofit space, you know, I kicked myself a lot because I was involved in all the things when I was in corporate HR. And then I realized I wasn't involved in anything when I came to nonprofit because there's such a chasm between the systems and the structures and the institutions that hold power. I'm glad you brought that up. And the actual work that's happening in community. Part of CCT's 50th celebration in partnership with community partners that are advancing second chances indirectly or directly is to close that gap and narrow that gap even more. It is our institutional intention to contribute to economic mobility in ways that invite people to, yes, I'm raising my hand because I'm ready to reckon with, I'm ready to acknowledge, and I'm ready to get involved and get involved in ways that are meaningful based on my frame of reference. And for folks that have the experience of working with RMJJ, folks are out in the community doing that, right? What are some misconceptions about RMJJ that are out in the community that sometimes can be a barrier to entry for folks who maybe have taken the 2-day racial equity and can't quite turn the dial from transaction to activation at a human level? What are some misconceptions that you've encountered?
That's a great question. Because of how our racial equity workshops are structured, and because we have over time provided access to workshops from different industries and different people, some of our attendees or alumni say, well, what I do is not connected to juvenile justice. Or what I do is not, I don't see myself within RMJJ other than outside the workshop. And so part of what we began to educate is that, yes, we want to stay focused on our mission and vision and what we're about. But at the same time, this is why we have diverse representation inside our workshop to show that these disparities doesn't just happen in juvenile justice or criminal justice. They happen in other systems, whether it's housing, education, law enforcement, social service, nonprofit, faith-based, the business community, so they can begin to see the broad landscape and the depth of these disparities and how they're impacting. The second piece of that, I think, when people see that and understand that, now for those that continue to either serve on our subcommittees, serve on our work groups, or participate in our biannual conference or come to that monthly Catalyze and Change session, they have a sense of community. They begin to find a place where they can come, feel seen, valued, heard, respected, but also continue their educational journey, where they're doing it in a space with others who are on their journey. In addition to that, they are able to now, when we break out in affinity groups, to really be having to engage in different dialogues and conversations that allow them to deepen their knowledge and awareness, or to begin to address their own biases or their own microaggressions or the challenges that they're having within a said community where they feel some measure of psychological safety. And so when we talk about cultivating environments where a sense of belonging, there's also the other side of that for me or for others to say, how do we curate a space where if I want to feel brave enough or courageous enough to show my voice, am I showing up in a way where I'm influencing a cultural space where other people can do the same thing? And if not, it's not what's wrong with the other person. The thing is what's wrong with me. And so this work is a constant evolution and constant reminder around self-reflections on it's about us and how we're shifting our mental model, how we're shifting our thinking, how we're shifting our values, our beliefs, our choices and decisions, and who we're accountable to. And I think we have to change the narrative, right? The other piece of that is that not everybody want Charlotte to be a second class. We have to acknowledge that may be a perspective out there, right? We have to acknowledge there may be people out there who have access to resources and power. They may choose not to utilize their access to resource and power for this particular cause because there's so many things around our self-interest. And maybe that's not the self-interest of other people.
Right.
But if we pull it back from a systems level, from a community level, I think all of us have a self-interest to want Charlotte to be the best place that we want it to be for all people.
Right.
All of us want it to be a place where individuals can prosper, individuals can feel like they have a sense of community, but also feel a sense of success and contribution to this community. But that looks different for different people.
Right.
And I think we all have a role to play in this, no matter where we sit and stand inside of systems and institutions, to be a part of the journey to make it a place, particularly for those second-class citizens, in a way that allows them to feel seen, heard, valued, respected, but also for them to take care of themselves and their families.
Yeah, yeah. Man, you're dropping some jewels today. You mentioned affinity groups as a part of catalyzing change. And I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that for folks who maybe for the first time are hearing about RMJJ or are part of catalyzing change and are active with the affinity groups. Owning our journey is also complex, right? Because for most of us, it isn't until we reach adulthood that we recognize the opportunity to pause and like, hold on. Here's how I came up and learned all the things. And now all of a sudden something else is entering into the space. And, you know, depending on where you are as a seasoned adult or, you know, what your generational representation is, right? That self-interest may be, you know, I'm on the downswing. Yeah. Like y'all can go fix it over there. Or you can be of a younger generation where like, y'all been going through this for so long and our generation is taking over because y'all don't have it together. Right. And in between, you've got layers of justice involvement, right? Like with young people, and we think about, I'm from the 80s, grew up in the 80s, and we went to the rec center and had all kinds of programs and things like that. And some of those things are coming back now. But young people today don't have, in my opinion, as many options, right? And then you've got the seasoned population. They're like, if the young people would just get off the street and, go do something with themselves, because the frame of reference is there is something for them to do, but it's over there, right? And so that pipeline, right, to incarceration or to justice involvement sometimes starts with a difference of self-interest or even community interest based on generational differences. Correct. And what I'm hearing you say, Derrik, is through catalyzing change, and even particularly with the affinity groups and the work that is emerging for the youth groups, there is a space and environment for folks to contend with that through the structure and the continuous improvement in the growth and expansion that you are focused on with RMJJ. That's a beautiful segue to our volunteer and donor community who may be a little less proximate to the actual issue, but very proximate to the learning and education and awareness and process and tools environment that RMJJ provides. Talk a little bit about the affinity groups and how folks make that transition from the 2-day course to the affinity groups.
Yes, thank you. For those that might be interested in learning more about RMJJ or getting connected to our racial equity workshop, it is a 2-day workshop. Information is out on our website to learn more about that. But it's a requirement that you complete the 2-day racial equity workshop in order to gain access to the affinity groups, now catalyzing change. And once people have access to those, it's really around self-interest. Do I want to continue the journey of self-discovery? Do I want to continue to begin to know more about my biases, implicit, explicit biases, my blind spots, my microaggression? Do I better want to deepen my knowledge around this topic and issue from a standpoint that how do I begin to connect with other people to begin to shift my perspective? And the only way we shift perspectives is bring people from diverse perspectives together to have that dialogue. But we do it in a respectful way. The second piece is through our affinity groups, we have the opportunity to break out and affinity groups, one for people of color, to begin to allow people of color to do their own work, to listen, to learn, to grow, and we have a framework for that. And then also there's affinity group for what we call our WAG, or white affinity groups. So this is where those who self-identify as being white are able to come together, where we like to say where white people can talk to other white people in a way to learn, to grow, to assist with their growing edge. But then we come back to have the opportunity where we're able to talk across different racial groups. And we're able to do it in a way that's respectful. We're able to do it in a way where we're beginning to see some of our information gaps, our blind spots, understanding the narratives and begin to reshape narratives. And more importantly, it allows us to be close and proximate to each other.
Yes.
It allows us to build community. It allows us to build relationships. It allows us to earn the trust about how we can be in community to talk about things that are difficult, but do it in a way where we're learning together, we're growing together, and we respect people, give them grace and mercy if they're not where we think they should be, just as we want people to give us grace and mercy as well.
How does that play out? You know, there will be folks who are listening and watching that are like waiting for the zingers, right? And unfortunately, we were living in times where clickbait and the worst case scenario is what drives, engagement and what drives the numbers and analytics and stuff like that. And it's not lost on me that we have folks who might be listening to the podcast that are waiting to hear where it went wrong, right? And that is a part of American culture, right? That is an invitation to pause and explore, like, why do we always go to worst case scenario and not best case scenario, that which brings us joy? Because I promise you, for folks that have justice involvement, oftentimes like folks that are that identify as Black or a person of color, there is a part of our existence and our identity where we are constantly on watch, right? And so if we're constantly on watch based on certain identities that we carry, and we are living in a society where worst case scenario is where resources are often given, where clickbait is currency, it makes it difficult to do abundance work, right? And owning your journey, and CCT celebrating 50 years of strengthening second chances in our community, and now with an institutional intention to do that work more declaratively in partnership with other institutions like RMJJ, you've got the naysayers, right? You've got the devil's advocate, and we respect folks having their frame of reference or their self-interest wherever they are. How do you bridge within RMJJ when folks are contending with that part of their journey, whether it's in the affinity group, whether it's in WAG, or whether it's in the Black Caucus group, when it hits when it hits someone that, oh, this is how I was showing up, or this is how I was showing up, and I know I was showing up this way, and this is what my self-interest is, and I know I took this class. Like, how do you navigate some of those challenges that are a part of the work, right? It's a part of the journey too.
It's a part of the work and journey. There's no perfect process, right? There's no perfect person.
Right.
But I believe
some people think there is a perfect process.
Some
and a
people
perfect
do.
Journey, right?
But not within RMJJ.
Right. Or CCT.
But one of I think our strengths come from is that, one, in order to participate in the Catalyzing Change, you have to complete the 2-day racial equity workshop. The second piece is participating in Catalyzing Change is volunteer, not voluntold. So people have to sign up to volunteer to participate.
Opt in.
To opt in.
Own your journey.
Own your journey. The second piece is that sometimes people will come and they may be triggered by something that someone said, by an educational piece, by a video, by a statement, by a comment, and those things do happen.
Yeah.
We've seen it happen in a broader group, and we've seen it happen in smaller groups. And we manage accordingly, right? Because we understand that we give them that space, we give them that grace, we give them that mercy, we give them that support, we give them that coaching. We also don't try to focus on guilt, and we don't try to focus on shame.
Yes.
We try to talk this notion around gentle accountability, right? Which means that even though you're thinking and feeling a certain kind of way, we want you to feel free to express and own that. But at the same time, we want to do it in a way that's respectful to the group and the culture.
Yeah.
Right? So the gentle accountability is that we just can't come and say and do what you want and how you want,
Right.
because then, we have to have another conversation to see, are you really building around the shared values of community and how you respect community?
Right.
Or is it that you want people to respect you, but you don't respect the space?
Right.
And so again, that's our own work. And that's where that gentle accountability comes in.
Yeah.
And so we want people to come. We want people to feel like they can show up as themselves. And then we want people to feel like they are supported. When those things do happen, there is a follow-up that we stay connected to that person, because they may feel embarrassed or shame or something happens, but let them know it's all right.
Right.
And we're here to support you on your journey.
Right.
And I think that's what we build our community around, because any of us can have a bad day.
Yeah.
We never know what people are experiencing when they're going through something. And so that's why I said giving some kind of benefit of the doubt, or helping them to clarify what they're saying, or offer another perspective, engage in a constructive dialogue. We promote that. We want you to engage in constructive dialogue in a way that allows us to listen and to learn, but also allow other people to share their viewpoint and perspective of the information that's being shared.
Yeah.
This is all of our growing edge together.
Exactly. So kicking off our 50th anniversary celebration this spring, and particularly around Ramona Brant Day, which is on February 25th each year, we started a series. We did a 4-part series during the month of March called The Unlearning, right? And so each week we provided some information, whether it was something to read or something to watch or something to listen to, around the subject of incarceration. And our first week was really about the numbers, right? This is for those who may be familiar with organizations, national organizations like the Prison Policy Initiative, Vera Institute for Justice, other organizations that are putting out data, Sentencing Project, organizations that are putting out data and numbers around incarceration. And while we want to provide that with the folks whose self-interest is around the data, because maybe there's if they would have just done this, or the data shows that public safety is X, right, that they can own their journey and do some learning and do some reading or watching or listening. And then we offered an opportunity for folks to hop on our Facebook page and have some dialogue with us about the topics. So weeks 2, 3, and 4, we talked about our supportive employment program. We talked about parental incarceration and the impact on children and families, and including deportation. In the last week, we actually had 2 residents, former residents from our Center for Women, who have graduated the program and are doing exceptionally well out in the community, to show the lived experience of a different conversation around someone with the experience of incarceration. And those were wildly successful. That offering was wildly successful, but it was an unlearning. Correspondingly, what I'm hearing you say, right, and this is why we're doing this, RMJJ is almost like creating a new world over here, where the space that you are curating following participation in the 2-day course is to practice with, I feel a way about learning that I've been moving in the world in this particular way.
Yes.
But I can go to a Catalyzing Change event, or contact a Catalyzing Change colleague, or go to an RMJJ affinity group to be my broken or not perfect self.
Yes.
And it's okay.
Yes.
Because out in the world right now, right, you can't be broken. You can't be not perfect. You always got to be put on. You have to know everything about everything, right? And so while these things are happening in our lanes, what would it look like, Charlotte, right, in making Charlotte a more equitable and second chance city, where we make it okay to just be?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The world that we're in over here at the Center for Community Transition is, we don't do the work for anyone who is participating in any of our programs, but it is precisely and explicitly our intention to create an environment for folks who opt in to our supportive employment program for residents who apply while they are in prison and come to our Center for Women, or for children, youth, and families who are a part of our family program to take advantage of the space that we're creating for.
Yes.
Right? What would it look like in making Charlotte a second chance and more equitable city when catalyzing change, the work CCT is doing around second chances very specifically, and other partners across the community create this little baby world that already exists at RMJJ? How do we expand our work together? You were telling me about some cool things that we're going to talk about more after this podcast, but talk a little bit more about that, because it's happening.
Yeah, it's happening. I think this is where that cross systems work come in, right? I think we want to be able to continue to be a convener that bring people together, understanding that the foundation of all our dialogue and discussions has to be rooted in the truth around institutional structural racism. The second piece we have to also be foundational is understanding data and really looking at disaggregated data and understanding the story and lived experiences behind the data for those who have those lived experiences who are justice involved. The second piece is we have to begin to look at really examining from the data who's benefiting and who's burdened, who has a structural advantage and who has a structural disadvantages, and how do we have these conversations in a way that's that can be challenging and tough, but yet we're doing it in a way where we have shared values that we want the best for all of our citizens. And that comes from the individual effort, right? The second piece is we have to focus on systems and structures. We really have to begin to use an equity lens to look at policies, procedures, and practice. And to this day, we know how the work around diversity, equity, and inclusion is under attack around our in our own state, around our country. And so we are talking about a value system of people in power who don't see all their citizens as being valued, respected. And so until we can have a community, regardless of your background, regardless of your experiences, where we feel that each person should have an access to opportunities and resources to make them successful, for them to live their full life, but also have a sense of belonging where they feel valued, feel appreciated, being heard, and feel like they're a part of the community. And I don't know we're there. I don't think that we're there. Maybe in some aspects. There's a lot of othering, and we won't name it. We won't call it out. And we also, and we have to, right? We have to call it out, because there's also a perspective out there when we talk about power, we talk about influence. We talk about those who have access to resources. And so I think our community has a lot of resources in it. So the question is, do we have citizens in our community that have the heart and mind that wants the best for everyone, and begin to divert some of those resources to those organizations that's really trying to make an impact and work together with this cross systems work or collectively for our community? And
I think we're going to do that.
I think we
together.
Are. Yes.
I didn't mean to cut you
off,
but that
fine.
Was a moment where we're going to do it.
And we invite others to join the movement to do so. Right? To really look at how do we have collective impact, where each of us in this community feels that we have a place and space to have access to jobs, to resources, to money, to feed ourselves and feed our families, right? And I think at the bare minimum, if we ask men and women, or children, what do you want? I don't think anyone would not say, I don't want the best for myself, and I want the best for my family.
That's right. That's so true. So before the show, we were talking about some of the initiatives that we're working on right now. And I was explaining to you second chance employment, right? So there's 70 million plus folks that have justice involvement. 1 in 3 people, so look to your left, look to your right, wherever you're at, somebody has justice involvement in your close proximate circle. And they have barriers to employment, right? We call this collateral consequences of incarceration in the space. And so we were talking a little bit about our work with second chance employment and creating an environment where businesses at an institutional level are less passive and apprehensive about exploring or all the way to implementing a second chance employment program. So what does that mean simplified? There are companies in Charlotte that are hiring people with records that don't want to say they are publicly for fear of the institutional stigma and cancel culture and shame and guilt and all these other things. At the same time, businesses that are or are not hiring people with records have people with records that work for them, right? And so it isn't until we take action that we can begin to address what comes up at an individual or at an institutional level. Yeah. And there are lots of efforts going on in Charlotte around workforce and workforce development. And what I'm very pleased, because this is very different than how it was when I got into the space about 8 years ago, conversations around second chance employment explicitly. How is the justice involved population affected by this thing that we're doing around economic mobility? Those conversations weren't happening in 2016, 2017. And now in almost every conversation, whether it's around housing or employment or health or all of these social determinants, justice involvement is a part of it. But very specifically, you and I were talking about workforce.
Yes.
And I think I got most excited that, like, okay, we absolutely positively, we might have to come back to another Own Your Journey podcast to talk about some things that result from these conversations, because there absolutely is a bridge to the work that we're doing around getting talent back to work and the work that you are beginning to step into and implement around workforce. So I know some of it is forthcoming, but would love to share, because this is an example, folks, about how we own our journey together. And it isn't perfect, but it can be and will be, right, transformational.
Yes.
Right? The transactions that lead to the outcomes, generational outcomes that we know are possible, we are intentionally making that happen. And so I was super excited in all of my former HR-ness and now my work at CCT about the workforce initiatives that RMJJ is embarking upon. So what can you share about that work?
No, I appreciate that. When we talked about our 2-day racial equity workshop, that premise is foundation around workforce development. And so one of the things that our founder and co-founders and early leaders who formed RMJJ was really focused on how we really bring the workforce to the table. How do we bring systems and institutional leaders to the table who have a shared interest? It was started out when we looked at juvenile justice, but now is juvenile justice was also expanded beyond juvenile justice to look at all systems and institutions. And so one of the opportunities that I invite different types of systems and system leaders to bring your workforce to participate in 2-day racial equity workshop, to begin to glean information, to look at how do you go back to your organization, to begin to revise and look at your policy, procedures, and practices, look at the information gap, look at opportunities about how you now can really create a culture that's more intentionally inclusive for all people, particularly those that are justice involved.
Yeah, I love that. I'm so ready to get into that work with you. I'm so ready to get into that. So, Derrik, what are you most proud of at RMJJ?
I'm proud of the opportunity to be able to be at an organization where you have individuals from different walks of life that are coming together to want to do some good work together. It's slow work, it's hard work, it's challenging work, but I think people feel there's a measure of accomplishment, even though things moving slow. I think we've made tremendous strides. I think all of our system and partner leaders who have stood up to say that this work is important, that's willing to invest their time, their effort, their talent, their gifts, their skills to be a part of the process, but also have allowed their workforce to participate and engage, not just in the workshop, but to support through volunteerism. And also through donations. And so I think it's a collaborative work. I think also there are a number of systems and system leaders out there who I want to thank because of their courage. Because when we started this work, it wasn't fun work, right? Many people didn't want to touch it because of the stigma around it. But I think over time, people have grown in a way of their knowledge and awareness, really began to look inside of themselves and look at their organization to see what can I do just to become a better person? And then more importantly, what role do I play? What influence do I have to begin to shift policies, procedure, practice, and culture in a way that people feel a sense of belonging and heard inside our culture, inside our organizations.
Yeah.
And it's slow work. There's some resistance that happens. I don't want to acknowledge that, but the existence that happens. But I don't want that to overshadow the tremendous effort and work of people who have sacrificed of their jobs, their careers, their families, their time to want to be engaged in this work, but also their commitment to our mission and vision. But I think the commitment to each other.
Yeah.
I think it synergizes and re-energizes people to know that you can show up in a space and there's a comfort level to know that people in this room want to be here and they want the best for us, but they also want the best for the community and other people as well.
Yeah. Thank you for your leadership in that. Thank you for your leadership. How can folks get connected to RMJJ's work?
Yeah. I would say, one, visit our website. We're in the process of updating it, but there's a lot of great information out there. You can reach out to me. Welcome any dialogue, any conversation with anybody who wants to connect to look at how you can get more invested or more involved, particularly if you're a system leader and you want to bring your workforce to participate in our 2-day racial equity workshop. Want to talk about opportunities to do that, or if you're somebody that's from the community, from the public, who are not attached to a system or institution but want to get engaged and get involved, there's a place and space for everyone.
Yeah. And the RMJJ website is rmjj.org.
Correct.
Yes.
rmjj.org.
rmjj.org. Write it down. On the website, do you have like a sign up or like you can put your email to stay connected? Like a subscribe.
Yes.
So make sure you go to rmjj.org, subscribe so you can stay in touch with. Derrik talked about the 2-day racial equity class, the catalyzing change, which comes after you take the 2-day equity class. And there's a lot of incredible work that's happening with catalyzing change, with the subcommittees, with the build out of cross-system collaborations that, as Derrik said, there is a space for everyone in the community to get involved. I promise you CCT will be involved. If you are a corporate, if you are a person who works in a corporate environment, whenever I do racial equity classes or even in conversations just in general, and folks are curious about second chance employment, I always start with the ERGs, right? So you work at X company, what is your ERG focused on?
Yes.
And there are some very easy and simple questions that can begin a dialogue internally. It sounds like you and folks that are a part of RMJJ, as well as us over at CCT, we can help facilitate those conversations.
Yes, that's great.
I encourage and invite and strongly encourage folks to tap into RMJJ. It is a trusted resource for the business community and the philanthropic community and the community.
Yes.
And the way that we own our journey together as a part of making Charlotte a more equitable and second chance city that drives economic mobility outcomes is when we are intentional and declarative about the ways that connection happens, right, at a system and practice level. So big up to you for the work that you're doing as the inaugural I remember that process.
Yes, you was with us on our journey. We appreciate you and everything that you've done.
And it's not lost on me. Much respect for the invitation to be a part of that work back in the day. And so proud of where it has come under your leadership, and even more proud and honored to have an opportunity to do the work that we're about to do together. To be what I say strategically disruptive in a very positive and affirming way, and how we make Charlotte truly equitable and an inclusive and second chance city. This is Derrik Anderson, Executive Director of Race Matters for Juvenile Justice right here in our community. I want to shout you out and give you flowers and love for your leadership and for saying yes to be my very first guest, our very first guest on your Own Your Journey podcast. I am Patrice Funderburg, Executive Director at the Center for Community Transitions. You can tap into our work on our website, centerforcommunitytransitions.org. We are also on socials. You can find us on Facebook at CCT Charlotte, and also on Instagram at CCT Charlotte on Instagram, and find out all about our work We too have a subscribe button on our website. And as a part of our pathway to our 50th anniversary celebration, which is going to happen this fall, would love for folks to tap in and drop your email in our subscribe button so you don't miss any information. You can also reach out to me or my team if you have interest, or if you are a person who is directly impacted by justice involvement or deportation. We want you to be a part of our community, which extends to Race Matters for Juvenile Justice and our other partners in the community. And together, this is how we own our journey together in making Charlotte a second chance city. We'll see you on the next podcast. Thank you for joining. Peace.